The desert sun hammered down on the rocky compound as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison crouched behind a crumbling wall, sweat stinging his eyes beneath his tactical goggles. His team of 6 Navy SEALs had been tracking this particular insurgent cell for 3 weeks across the unforgiving terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province. Intelligence suggested the group was responsible for a series of devastating attacks on coalition forces, but what they found here would challenge everything they thought they knew about their enemy. Morrison signaled to his point man, Petty Officer Rodriguez, who was positioned 30 meters to his left behind an overturned vehicle. The compound ahead looked abandoned, its mud brick walls scarred by years of conflict. Bullet holes dotted the structures like angry eyes, and the acrid smell of old smoke still lingered in the air. But Morrison's instincts, honed by 15 years of special operations, told him something was wrong. The silence was too complete, too perfect. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team," Morrison whispered into his radio. "We're at the target location. Compound appears deserted, but maintaining caution." The voice of their intelligence officer crackled back through his earpiece. "Copy, Alpha Team. Satellite shows no movement, but be advised. Local sources reported someone was seen here as recently as yesterday." Rodriguez made a subtle hand gesture, pointing to his eyes and then to a second-story window of the main building. Morrison squinted through the heat shimmer and caught a brief glimpse of movement. Just a shadow, but enough to confirm they weren't alone. The team moved with practiced precision, each SEAL knowing his role without need for verbal communication. Sergeant Thompson, their explosives expert, circled to the rear of the compound while Petty Officers Chen and Walsh took positions to cover the side entrances. Morrison and Rodriguez would take point on the main building. As they approached the entrance, Morrison noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh drag marks in the dust led from a dark stain on the ground, clearly blood, to the doorway of the building. But what disturbed him wasn't the blood itself, it was the pattern. The stain was massive, suggesting a severe wound, yet the drag marks showed someone had moved under their own power. Rodriguez saw it too, and exchanged a worried glance with his commander. In their combined 25 years of combat experience, they'd seen plenty of wounded fighters, but someone losing that much blood shouldn't be capable of dragging themselves anywhere. They breached the building systematically, clearing each room with methodical care. The interior was mostly empty, except for scattered debris and the remnants of hasty meals. But in what appeared to be a makeshift medical area, they found something that stopped them in their tracks. Bloodied bandages were scattered across a crude table, along with basic medical supplies and what looked like surgical instruments. The amount of blood on the materials suggested major trauma, the kind that would typically be fatal without immediate hospital care. Yet there were no bodies, and the blood trail continued deeper into the building. "Commander," Chen's voice came through their comms. "You need to see this." Morrison and Rodriguez followed the voice to find Chen standing in what appeared to be a storage room. The walls were covered with photographs and documents, but what caught their attention were the surveillance photos of coalition forces, including several clear shots of Morrison's own team from previous missions. "They've been watching us," Rodriguez muttered, studying a photo that showed him clearly through a sniper scope's crosshairs. But it was Thompson's voice that froze them all. "Contact. Second floor, moving fast." The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from above, followed by Thompson's urgent shouts. Morrison's team rushed toward the stairs, but before they could reach the second floor, a figure appeared at the top of the staircase. The man was tall and lean, dressed in faded military fatigues that were soaked with fresh blood. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, and a field dressing covered what appeared to be a severe head wound. He should have been unconscious or dead, but his eyes were alert and focused as he raised an AK-47 with his good arm. Morrison's training kicked in instantly, and he dove for cover as bullets sprayed the area where he'd been standing. His team returned fire, and Morrison was certain he saw at least 2 rounds hit their target center mass. The figure staggered, but didn't fall, instead disappearing back into the upper level of the building. "Thompson, report," Morrison called into his radio as they cautiously advanced up the stairs. "I put 3 rounds in him, Commander," came Thompson's voice, strained with confusion. "Center mass hits, I'm sure of it, but he just kept moving. It's like the bullets didn't even slow him down." When they reached the second floor, They found Thompson positioned behind an overturned desk, his weapon trained on an empty doorway. Blood was splattered across the walls and floor, confirming that their shots had found their target. There, Rodriguez pointed to an open window where a rope made of torn cloth hung down to the courtyard below. He went out that way. Morrison approached the window carefully and looked down. In the dust below, he could see clear footprints leading away from the building, along with drops of blood that formed a trail toward the compound's rear wall. Overwatch. This is Alpha Team, Morrison reported. We have one enemy combatant, wounded but mobile. He's escaped the main building and appears to be heading toward the mountains. As they prepared to pursue, Chen made a discovery that would haunt them for weeks to come. In the room where their target had made his stand, behind the overturned furniture, he found a pile of medical records and X-rays. The documents were in multiple languages, Arabic, Russian, and English, but the X-rays told a story that defied explanation. The films showed a human skeleton that had endured incredible trauma. Multiple healed fractures, evidence of several gunshot wounds, and what appeared to be shrapnel embedded throughout the torso. Some of the injuries looked recent, while others showed signs of healing over many years. But what disturbed Chen most was a notation on one of the English documents that simply read, "Subject continues to demonstrate extraordinary resistance to conventional trauma. Recovery rate exceeds normal human parameters." Morrison studied the documents with growing unease. The medical records spanned nearly a decade and came from various sources. Some appeared to be from military field hospitals, others from underground medical facilities. All documented the same individual, and all noted the same impossible pattern of survival and recovery. "Commander." Walsh's voice crackled through the radio from his position outside. "You need to get down here. We've got a problem." When Morrison's team emerged from the building, they found Walsh standing over a section of disturbed earth near the compound's outer wall. He'd uncovered what appeared to be a shallow grave. But instead of bodies, it contained clothing and equipment, all soaked in blood. "It looks like someone was buried here recently," Walsh explained. "But then they dug themselves out. The claw marks in the dirt. They're coming from inside the grave, not outside." Morrison knelt and examined the evidence. The clothing was riddled with bullet holes and blast damage, yet there were no human remains. The implication was impossible to accept, yet the evidence was undeniable. As the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, Morrison's team prepared to follow the blood trail that led away from the compound. They had come here hunting a terrorist cell, but they'd found something far more disturbing. Somewhere in the rugged terrain ahead of them was a man who seemed to possess an inhuman ability to survive injuries that should have been fatal. The radio crackled with their pilot's voice. "Alpha Team, be advised that locals in the area have reported sightings of what they call the ghost soldier for the past several years. Someone who appears in firefights, takes lethal damage, and vanishes, only to appear again days later." Morrison looked at his team and saw his own concerns reflected in their faces. They were elite warriors, trained to handle any threat, but they were about to pursue an enemy unlike anything they'd encountered before. As darkness settled over the compound, the blood trail glowed faintly in the light of their tactical flashlights, leading them toward a confrontation that would test everything they believed about the nature of human endurance and survival. The blood trail led Morrison's team through increasingly treacherous terrain as they climbed higher into the Afghan mountains. Each drop of blood on the rocky path told a story that defied medical science. Their target was losing significant amounts of blood, yet the trail remained consistent, showing no signs of the weakness or collapse that should have accompanied such blood loss. 3 hours into their pursuit, Rodriguez held up his fist, bringing the team to an immediate halt. Through his night vision scope, he'd spotted something that made his pulse quicken. About 200 meters ahead, a figure sat motionless on a rocky outcropping, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "Eyes on target," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "He's just sitting there, like he's waiting for us." Morrison moved up to Rodriguez's position and studied the figure through his own scope. The man appeared to be treating his wounds, methodically working on his injured arm. What should have been impossible was the fact that he seemed alert and functioning despite injuries that would have incapacitated or killed most people. Chen, circle left. Thompson, take the high ground to our right. Walsh, you're with Rodriguez on overwatch. Morrison commanded quietly. I'm going to try to get closer for positive identification. As Morrison began his careful approach, using the rocky terrain for cover, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. The figure on the rocks hadn't moved, hadn't shown any indication that he was aware of their presence. Yet something felt wrong. In Morrison's experience, wounded fighters didn't sit calmly in the open unless they had a very good reason. When Morrison was within 50 meters, the figure suddenly spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, you and your team have been following me for quite some time. Morrison froze. The man was speaking in perfect, unaccented English. And he knew Morrison's rank and name. More disturbing was the calm, almost conversational tone, as if they were meeting for coffee rather than engaged in a deadly pursuit. You can tell your men to hold their positions, the figure continued, still not turning around. I'm not going anywhere. At least, not yet. Morrison activated his radio. All units, hold position. Do not engage unless fired upon. Slowly, Morrison emerged from cover, his weapon ready but not immediately threatening. As he got closer, he could see the extent of the man's injuries in the moonlight. Fresh bullet wounds in his chest and shoulder were roughly bandaged, but blood was still seeping through the dressings. The head wound Thompson had observed earlier was more severe than they'd initially thought. It should have been fatal. Who are you? Morrison called out, maintaining a safe distance. The figure finally turned, and Morrison found himself looking at a face that belonged on a wanted poster. The man appeared to be in his 30s, with sharp features marked by numerous scars. His eyes held an intelligence that seemed to pierce through Morrison's tactical preparations and see directly into his thoughts. I have had many names over the years, the man replied, but your intelligence files probably list me as Khalil Hassan, though that's not the name I was born with. Morrison knew that name. Hassan was linked to at least a dozen major attacks across 3 countries, each time managing to escape situations that should have been impossible to survive. He was considered a high-value target, but also a ghost, someone who appeared, struck, and vanished without a trace. Khalil Hassan is supposed to be dead, Morrison said. Killed in a drone strike in Syria 2 years ago. Hassan smiled, an expression that held no warmth. I was there for that strike, Commander. Fascinating experience, being at the center of a Hellfire missile impact, most educational. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. The Hellfire strike in Syria had been confirmed. Satellite imagery showed complete destruction of the target building, and thermal sensors had detected no survivors in the aftermath. That's impossible, Morrison stated, though even as he said it, he was beginning to suspect that normal rules didn't apply to this man. Is it? Hassan asked, standing slowly despite his injuries. You've seen the medical records. You've followed my blood trail. You've put bullets in me tonight. And yet here I am, having a conversation with you under the stars. At what point do you accept that your understanding of what's possible might be limited? Chen's voice crackled through Morrison's earpiece. Commander, I'm in position. I have a clear shot. Hassan somehow heard the transmission and chuckled. Petty Officer Chen is an excellent marksman. Navy Cross recipient, if I remember correctly. Saved his unit in Kandahar with some remarkable shooting. Tell me, Commander, how do you think he'll react when his bullets pass through me without effect? Morrison's blood turned cold. Hassan not only knew Morrison's name and rank, but he had detailed knowledge of Morrison's team members and their service records. This level of intelligence suggested a network far more sophisticated than they'd imagined. You've been studying us, Morrison said. I've been studying everyone, Commander. Your military, your intelligence agencies, your scientists, all trying to understand something that's beyond their current grasp of biology and physics. Hassan began walking slowly toward Morrison, seemingly unconcerned by the multiple weapons trained on him. Stay where you are, Morrison commanded, raising his weapon. Hassan paused but didn't retreat. Commander, in approximately 30 seconds, your position is going to come under attack from mortars positioned in the valley below. My associates have been tracking your progress since you left the compound. You have a choice to make. Morrison's radio exploded with urgent chatter. Incoming! Incoming mortars! Take cover! The night sky lit up with the flash of explosions as mortar rounds began impacting around their position. Morrison dove behind a boulder as shrapnel whined overhead, and when he looked up, Hassan had vanished. All units, report! Morrison called into his radio as dirt and rocks rained down around them. Thompson here. I'm hit but mobile. Rodriguez, minor shrapnel wounds. Chen, I'm good. Walsh, wounded but functional. The mortar attack lasted only 2 minutes. But when it ended, the mountain was quiet, except for the ringing in their ears. Morrison emerged from cover to find no sign of Hassan anywhere in the immediate area. Overwatch. This is Alpha Team, Morrison reported. We've taken casualties and lost contact with the primary target. Request immediate extraction. As they waited for their helicopter, Thompson made a discovery that added another layer to the growing mystery. Hidden under a pile of rocks where Hassan had been sitting, he found a metal case containing documents and photographs. Inside were surveillance photos of coalition forces dating back nearly 5 years, detailed maps of military installations, and most disturbing of all, medical research documents from various sources around the world. The research appeared to focus on human genetic modification, cellular regeneration, and something called Project Lazarus. Commander, Chen said, studying one of the documents with a flashlight. This talks about experiments on prisoners of war. Genetic therapy designed to enhance healing and resistance to trauma. It says here that most subjects died, but one showed remarkable success. Morrison took the document and read the clinical language that described procedures that sounded more like torture than medicine. The subject, identified only as L7, had undergone years of experimental treatment, enduring repeated trauma to test his enhanced healing capabilities. There's a photo here, Walsh said, holding up a medical photograph. Morrison looked at the image and felt his stomach drop. The photo showed a man strapped to a medical table, his body covered with surgical scars and monitoring equipment. Despite the clinical setting and obvious signs of suffering, the face was unmistakably Hassan. The sound of their extraction helicopter approaching filled the night air, but Morrison's mind was racing. They weren't dealing with just an enemy fighter. They were confronting the result of human experimentation that had created something that challenged the very nature of mortality. As they prepared their wounded for evacuation, Rodriguez found one more item in Hassan's hiding place. A handwritten note in English that simply read, Commander Morrison, this is only the beginning. The next time we meet, you'll understand that death is not the end for those like me. Your science created me. Your wars forged me. And now your people must face what they have wrought. The helicopter's rotors grew louder as it approached their landing zone, but Morrison knew that this encounter was far from over. Hassan hadn't been captured or killed. He had revealed himself deliberately, sharing just enough information to let them know they were facing an enemy unlike anything in their training or experience. As they loaded into the helicopter and lifted off from the mountain, Morrison looked down at the terrain below. Somewhere in those rocks and valleys was a man who defied death itself, and who seemed to possess knowledge about Morrison's team that suggested their every move had been anticipated. The medical documents tucked in Morrison's pack painted a picture of scientific hubris that had created a living weapon, one that had turned against its creators and now operated with an intelligence and patience that made him more dangerous than any conventional enemy they'd ever faced. 2 weeks after their encounter in the mountains, Morrison found himself in a sterile briefing room at Bagram Airfield, surrounded by officials he'd never seen before. The documents his team had recovered from Hassan's position had triggered an investigation that reached the highest levels of military intelligence. Dr. Sarah Chen, a geneticist from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, placed a thick folder on the conference table and looked directly at Morrison. Commander, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Project Lazarus was a joint operation between the CIA and a private defense contractor, conducted between 2008 and 2012. Morrison leaned forward, his jaw tightening. You're telling me our own people created this thing? The program was designed to create enhanced soldiers capable of surviving extreme trauma. Dr. Chen continued. The research was based on studies of individuals who demonstrated unusual healing capabilities. The subject you encountered, Khalil Hassan, was originally captured in Iraq in 2009. His real name was David Reeves, a former Army Ranger who had gone missing during a classified operation. The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. Hassan wasn't just an enemy fighter. He had been one of their own, an American soldier subjected to experiments that had stripped away his humanity and turned him into something else entirely. The experiments, Dr. Chen explained, consulting her notes, involved genetic modification designed to enhance cellular regeneration and pain tolerance. Most subjects died during the process, but Reeves survived and showed remarkable results. However, the psychological effects were unforeseen. He developed severe psychological trauma and eventually escaped from the facility. Morrison's radio operator, Petty Officer Walsh, had been monitoring intelligence chatter and suddenly interrupted. "Commander, we've got reports of Hassan, or Reeves, hitting a supply convoy about 20 kilometers from here. Multiple casualties." Dr. Chen stood immediately. "Commander Morrison, I need your team to bring him in alive. The Pentagon believes we can reverse the modifications, possibly restore his original personality. He's still an American soldier under all of that trauma and enhancement." Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him. They were being asked to capture a man who had been tortured by his own government, turned into a living weapon, and then hunted by the very military he had once served. Yet Hassan's actions over the past several years had resulted in the deaths of countless innocents. Within an hour, Morrison's team was airborne, heading toward the coordinates of the latest attack. As their helicopter approached the scene, the scope of destruction became clear. The convoy had been completely destroyed. But with surgical precision, only military targets had been hit, while civilian vehicles in the area remained untouched. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team," Morrison reported as they landed near the smoldering remains of armored vehicles. "We're on site. Beginning search for the target." The attack site told a story of incredible tactical skill. Hassan had positioned himself on high ground overlooking the convoy route, using the terrain to maximum advantage. The vehicles had been disabled with precise shots to their engines and fuel systems, forcing the soldiers to take cover where Hassan wanted them. Rodriguez discovered Hassan's firing position and called Morrison over. "Commander, look at this." The position showed evidence of a prolonged firefight. Spent shell casings were scattered around a natural rock shelter, and the ground was stained with blood, both fresh and dried. What disturbed Morrison was the methodical nature of the setup. Hassan had clearly planned this attack carefully, but he'd also prepared for a specific type of response. "He knew we'd come," Morrison realized. "This whole attack was designed to draw us here." Thompson's voice crackled through their comms. "Commander, I've got movement in the canyon below. Single individual, moving toward what looks like a cave system." Morrison studied the terrain through his binoculars. The cave system was a natural fortress, offering multiple escape routes but also limiting their own tactical options. It was exactly the kind of position a skilled soldier would choose for a final stand. As they approached the cave entrance, they found evidence that Hassan had been using this location as a base of operations. Medical supplies, communications equipment, and weapons caches were positioned throughout the cavern system. But what caught Morrison's attention were the personal items, photographs, letters, and military decorations that belonged to David Reeves, the man Hassan had been before his transformation. Deep in the cave system, they found Hassan sitting in front of a small fire, tending to fresh wounds from the convoy attack. He looked up as Morrison's team surrounded him, showing no surprise at their arrival. "I wondered how long it would take them to tell you the truth," Hassan said, his voice carrying a weariness that hadn't been present during their previous encounter. "Did Dr. Chen explain what they did to me? What they turned me into?" Morrison kept his weapon trained on Hassan but found himself struggling with conflicting emotions. David Reeves, Army Ranger, 75th Regiment, reported killed in action. Mosul, 2009. Hassan nodded slowly. I died in that hospital room, Commander. What they brought back wasn't really me anymore. The man you're looking at is something else. A weapon designed to feel no pain, heal from any wound, and kill without hesitation or remorse. The attacks on coalition forces, Morrison said. The civilians who died because of your actions were necessary to expose what they created, Hassan replied. Do you think I'm the only one, Commander? Project Lazarus produced other survivors. Others like me are out there. And some of them never retained any human conscience at all. I've been hunting them while your intelligence agencies pretended they never existed. Chen's voice came through Morrison's earpiece. Commander, we're detecting multiple heat signatures moving toward your position from the south. It appears Hassan wasn't operating alone. Hassan stood, his movements still fluid despite his obvious injuries. They've found us, he said with what might have been relief. The others I've been tracking. They followed you here, just as I knew they would. Morrison's team immediately moved to defensive positions as the sound of automatic gunfire echoed from the cave entrance. But Hassan made no move to escape or attack. Instead, he picked up a high-powered rifle and moved toward the gunfire. Stay here, Commander, Hassan called over his shoulder. Let me handle the monsters I helped create. What followed was a firefight unlike anything Morrison had ever witnessed. Hassan moved through the cave system with inhuman speed and precision, engaging targets that Morrison's team could barely see. The attackers were clearly enhanced like Hassan, showing the same resistance to injury and impossible endurance. Chen, Morrison called into his radio. How many subjects survived Project Lazarus? 7 confirmed survivors, came the reply. Hassan, Reeves, was the most psychologically stable. The others showed severe antisocial disorders and were considered too dangerous to control. Morrison watched through his night vision as Hassan systematically eliminated the other enhanced soldiers. Each engagement was brutal and efficient. But Morrison could see that Hassan was taking severe damage in the process. Unlike their previous encounters, Hassan seemed to be reaching some kind of limit. When the gunfire finally stopped, Morrison found Hassan slumped against the cave wall, his enhanced healing apparently overwhelmed by the cumulative damage of the night's fighting. It's done, Hassan said, his voice weak but satisfied. The last of them are dead. Lazarus dies with us. Morrison knelt beside the man who had been both enemy and fellow soldier. We can get you medical treatment. Dr. Chen says the modifications might be reversible. Hassan shook his head. I've been dying for 5 years, Commander. Tonight, I finally get to stay dead. He looked directly at Morrison with eyes that suddenly seemed more human than they had before. Tell them what they created. Make sure this never happens again. Morrison watched as Hassan's breathing grew shallow and irregular. For the first time since their first encounter, the man seemed truly mortal. His enhanced physiology finally succumbing to wounds that would have killed anyone else hours earlier. David Reeves, Morrison said quietly. Hassan's eyes focused on him one last time. Thank you for using my real name, Commander. I'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. As Hassan died in the depths of the Afghan cave, Morrison realized they had witnessed both the end of a terrible experiment and the final act of a soldier who had never stopped fighting for his country, even after that country had abandoned him. The helicopter extraction that followed was quiet. Morrison's team had eliminated a significant threat, but the victory felt hollow. They had been forced to confront the consequences of their own government's hubris, and the cost had been measured in the life of a man who should have been their brother in arms. In his final report, Morrison wrote simply, "Target eliminated, threat neutralized. Recommend immediate investigation into the ethical oversight of all enhanced soldier programs. We must never again create enemies from our own people." The classified files on Project Lazarus were sealed indefinitely. But Morrison knew that somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery of defense research, other projects were likely continuing. The warrior who would not die had finally found peace. But the questions he had raised about the nature of service, sacrifice, and the limits of human experimentation would haunt Morrison for the rest of his career. In the end, Hassan had won his final battle, not through his enhanced abilities, but through his determination to ensure that the horrors inflicted upon him would never be repeated. His death had been the last act of David Reeves, American soldier, rather than the enhanced weapon he had been transformed into. Morrison carried that truth with him as his team flew back into the dawn, knowing that some victories come at a cost that makes celebration impossible.